In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And in a small room with far too many fabric scraps, there lived a beginner with a sewing machine. I had never used one before. I had no real plan at first, and yet I decided my very first sewing project would be Bilbo's patchwork dressing gown. This is a story of how a film costume, something I fell in love with at my local cinema as a teenager in 2012, slowly became my own unexpected little adventure. Every adventure has a beginning. Mine started with a dressing gown pattern, the purchase of a sewing machine, hours upon hours of studying reference photos, and the sudden confidence of someone who had no business feeling confident. I didn't begin with something sensible or small. I skipped straight past tote bags and pillowcases and went directly to recreating one of the coziest garments in Middle-earth, which in hindsight felt very much in the spirit of Bilbo himself. Slightly unprepared, quietly determined, and dramatically underestimating how long the journey might take. The goal was to stay as close as possible to the colours from the film, the kind of colours that feel like they belong in a hobbit hole, surrounded by books, teacups, and the faint possibility of unexpected company. Exact matches weren't always possible, so I gathered what I could. Heaps of second-hand scraps, thrifted fabrics, old clothes, and a few new pieces bought by the meter. Not perfect replicas, but close enough to feel at home in the Shire. And then the real work began. Every piece of fabric was washed, ironed, and prepared for its role. Some fabrics needed stabilizing with interfacing, others simply needed patience. To create the patchwork, each fabric was cut into the same 4 shapes. Again, and again, and again. Chalk dust everywhere, scissors in constant motion until they felt heavier than they should. Still, there was something very relaxing about cutting the same shapes dozens of times. Trace, cut, stack, repeat. And then came the sewing. Slowly, stitch by stitch, small pieces became pairs. Pairs became rows. Rows slowly grew into larger panels, until the panels became 4 sections of fabric. Each seemed open and pressed flat before the next could join it. The chaos began to organize itself. Hundreds of pieces of fabric, countless seams, endless ironing, and heaps of moments where I wondered if I had taken on more than I'd bargained for, quietly hoping, like Bilbo sitting out from Bag End, that everything would still line up in the end. Eventually, the patchwork pieces grew large enough for the pattern to sit on top of them. This was where everything started to feel real. The abstract became practical. Fabric became garment. Cutting into those panels felt like crossing a point of no return. From here, the dressing gown finally began to take its familiar shape. Shoulders joined, sleeves attached. At this stage, it was no longer a collection of careful seams, but something that could actually be worn while avoiding visitors or writing memoirs. Once the outer shell was complete, the focus shifted to comfort. The burgundy fleece became the lining, soft, warm, and entirely necessary for something meant to be worn in a hobbit hole. After weeks of research, organising, and more confusion than I cared to admit about how to bag a lining, I finally figured out how to construct the collar, pockets, and sleeve cuffs without a pattern. Patchwork and lining were finally joined. The belt was constructed mostly by machine, though even that required a few steady stitches by hand. But much of the finishing demanded something slower. The pockets were sewn in place by hand. Each one took a little time, making sure the corners lined up and the seams were secure. Then I turned to the bottom hem, folding it neatly and sewing it slowly, inch by inch. Finally came the gold thread. I stitched it across the collar, the sleeves, and the pockets. It was just a small detail, but it made the garment feel finished. Stitch after stitch, the fabric slowly came together. The machine had fallen silent, but the room had its own rhythm. Some evenings I worked with a radio company, other nights with The Hobbit playing on the screen, or a favourite film score floating through the room. Hand sewing became a quiet ritual. By this point, the pace of the entire project had slowed. The urgency of cutting and construction was gone, leaving only careful attention, the small unseen work that held everything together. Just steady progress, one stitch at a time. The final stretch. Fewer pieces, higher stakes, and a growing sense that this might actually work, provided no unexpected wizard turned up at the last moment. This dressing gown started as a costume, something I admired from afar on a screen, a detail in a story I love. But somewhere between the second-hand fabrics, the imperfect colour matches, and the many hours spent learning as I went, it became something else. It became my first sewing project, made during a very cold and rainy English winter. Made from slightly mismatched fabrics and a great deal of trial and error along the way. It isn't flawless, but it feels worn, comfortable and familiar, like it belongs to someone who values home, but found the courage to step outside it, and perhaps to fall a little bit in love along the way with a certain uninvited dark-haired guest. So this is my patchwork dressing gown, made slowly, made with care, made from many pieces stitched into one, there and back again, but armed with scissors instead of swords.